across from,
now,
Sherwin-Williams.
yeah, over where there's all that land.
Behind Austin,
Okay.
across from Sherwin-Williams.
The whole area, yeah.
So let's just say somebody goes in and buys that, and so right now it's $800,000 delinquent. And they're not gonna, I'm not gonna talk, I mean, I don't have any idea about acres or whatever. If you get one or two bidders and the bidder says, I'll give $400,000 for it, that's not gonna be a good day. Because they're not gonna talk about what it's worth, or, unless the city wants to step in and set a minimum, which means you'd be willing to pay it, which you've already paid for it.
Isn't that,
Because you paid for it in bond.
usually what happens, right? That
You could. You absolutely
person was
could. You could
supposed
go
to
in and
be
say,
from
we'll
it.
own it, and then you can hire a developer to take care of it, but that's gonna cost money, and that's all a policy decision. I have no interest, one way or the other, it's all a policy decision. I'm merely telling you, sensitivity analysis on the bond and interest fund is not gonna be pretty if we don't collect those specials, or don't timely collect those specials. And the analysis that I gave you was simply stating, you can delay, defer, all those things that we've done in the past. We've made those hard decisions. We've laid off people. We've gone salary freezes. We've done all those things, and you can do them again, but that's what you're going to be looking at if we can't solve some of these things that I can't.
And we can continue to defer
Absolutely.
But you're,
maintenance projects that we all
Sure.
know that we need.
but you're saying though, then, really, the emphasis should be on the general fund, not the bond and interest.
I was saying that the bond and interest fund is really not something to talk about reducing mills there, because I'm not one bit comfortable with that.
But I don't know that we ever said
The
that.
general.
No, but I'm saying, the general fund, you're looking at covering shortfall there too. So if you're gonna reduce 2 mills, now you've reduced your ability to cover anything that happens over in the bond. And I'm just saying, it's a little soon. Last year, the valuation increase was 1%. This year, it was 5.7. The average is 3. Okay, so what if it goes up 4, 5, whatever? We're still talking about, those aren't significant increases, because the only line it affects is the property tax line. All the other revenues are based on other assumptions, and there's a multitude of them.
And the bigger increases are actually happening in fees for service, or the service
And
charges.
that's true.
The service collections,
And yes.
not property tax.
That's right.
So if we would reduce the mill by 2 mills, let's say, and we could make that work this year, that's not to say that next year, if we do have a problem or whatever, we could have to maybe increase it, but I feel like the 2 mill reduction right now, I agree with Steve. I think it wouldn't have to be forever, or maybe it would be more next year. I mean, we don't know what the revenues are gonna be. I think right now, though, we are the stewards of the people's money. We've collected an absorbent amount. At one point, we had a 59% balance. That's huge. And it's the people's money. They're trusting us to do it, spend it right, and be wise with it. I agree with Steve. I like the 2 mil reduction. I don't know how we get to that.
What are we gonna cut out?
No, that's
What I look at it. So you wanna reduce.
You make
so-
those decisions, those are policy decisions.
Do you
And-
want, I think you have to look at the budget and say, okay, this is where I identify frivolous spending that we need to remove from the budget, because the budget's built to support the spending.
Certainly.
Obviously, the estimates are in place from a revenue perspective at a conservative level, but what happens if property taxes level out and they come out at 1? Then actually, because you put a mill rate or decrease in place, then that revenue has to come from a different, which is going to lower your reserves. It's going to end up, if it goes even lower, then
Okay.
you're going to have to come back to the taxpayers and say, we made a mistake by lowering the taxes last year. Now we recognize that the revenues aren't as high as they need to be. We need the money back.
All right, well, let's talk about expenditures and revenue, okay? Just this year, and this is estimated expenses, so we'll probably end up coming in a little bit higher than this. We went from $9,181,000 in actuals from last year, and then we're now looking at $11,641,700 this year. That is a huge increase in expenditures. That's almost $2.5 million more that we're spending this year than we spent last year. We want to talk about expenditures. I'll be all about having that discussion about expenditures in the general fund. I would be happy to have that discussion, because the increase next year is supposed to be almost as much.
You said you'd be happy to have that discussion.
Absolutely.
Let somebody else in the discussion. Christie, you
So
wanted to say
I
something?
think that Laura kind of explained where a lot of those were coming from.
Absolutely.
your
And it
initiatives
sounds like
and your
every single
projects.
one of them were initiatives that we voted on.
Or staff.
So, as we're talking about expenditures,
Mhm.
that's great to sit here after the fact and say, well, we've done this. We voted. to do those things. So there's no expenditures above $15,000 that aren't voted on by this council. So 25,000 now,
Actually-
as of midway.
There were, because when we did the little thing with the stars on there, some of the stuff that weren't the top rated ones were on the list.
Okay, yeah, let's go back to that
Yeah, let's
day.
go back. Yeah, let's
Because
do
I was
that.
the one that said, one of the priorities was to lower taxes. And
Mhm.
nobody, I mean, I got no stars other than my own, as I recall.
Mhm.
That was the priority that I tried to get you all to understand back then. So, but that's not to say that we can't change the priorities now. And I think,
And
I
that's
think-
what I'm saying.
I think
Let's-
there's a-
what are
there-
we cutting out then?
Well, okay, that's great. I think the first thing you have to acknowledge is that you can't just set a 2 mil decrease, because that's just a number. I mean, we
Yeah,
don't
you're
know
right.
that it's feasible. We don't know, I mean, what I would advocate for is some amount of reduction in the mill levy. And that's just because, and I said it last time, I'll say it again,
Mhm.
you know, this town needs to put some points on the board. I mean, and that's the easiest way to get the most bang for your buck. You don't need marketing and rebranding for the city. All you have to tell people is that for the last 2 years, taxes have been going down in Gardner, the mill levy has been going down. And I think you're going to get the economic development that you want. And it doesn't have to be a significant amount. We don't have to say taxes went down an an incredibly small amount of, $10 a year per homeowner. We just have to say taxes went down, and that's not lying.
Yeah.
But I think you set a pattern, much like you've set expectations on increases for cost of living adjustments. You set a pattern of expectations for the citizens of this town that finally, we've turned the corner and we're finally getting some of the money that was raised with that, was it 26% increase in 2010 or 34? For some reason those numbers.
It was 26.
26% increase.
$6.5 million increase.
Right, so, I mean, you've got to whittle that down. You've got to meet us halfway on that. I'm not saying we have to fix a point of 2 mils. I'm just saying we gotta whittle this thing down, and that's what that's what we should be doing for the past 3 years, in my opinion, is always, because this is a negotiation. I mean, you guys say this is your absolute lowest dollar that you need, and it's our job to say this is not what the taxpayers can afford. You're
Yeah,
gonna have
see,
to give.
The one thing where I would take exception with you on that is that that's not, they don't say that this is the lowest amount that they need.
Well, this is what they want.
This is, actually, we set 4 priorities. And you mentioned that we don't necessarily have to do economic development and rebranding, but the number 1 priority for the governing body for the last 2 budget cycles has been economic development. I mean, that's true, right?
Yes,
And
it
then
is.
look what it
Everybody-
got you for the for all those mill levy talks that we just talked about. Just look what it got you. You've got a bond and interest debt service fund problem because of all this emphasis on economic development.
Well, actually,
Right?
that's, the problem that we have in bond and interest is mostly attributable to benefit districts that were established a long time ago. And that wasn't anything that you and I did while we were on the council, or Christie when she was on the council before us. That was benefit districts, we had as many as 11 that were.
Yeah. We had 19.
19, upside down, just a few years.
Oh, they weren't all upside down,
Well,
sorry.
and not all of them were economic development either.
That's right.
Yeah.
No,
But that-
no,
but
not
yeah,
at all.
But benefit districts, and,
That's
you know,
economic
one of
development.
the first things that we did in the course of the last year was, well, actually, it might even been before I got elected mayor, was introduce a new policy that said that when we were going to offer people, some kind of incentive, that they were going to have to show capital and financial wherewithal to be able to pay their bills in case of another economic downturn, more or less. Is that about how you remember, Christie? So, I mean, we were already putting things in place to make sure that we didn't have a repeat of the 19 I'm not gonna say upside down again, the 19 benefit districts that were causing us trouble. So, at the end of the day, we still, as a council, maybe 4-1, still said that economic development was our number 1 priority.
So what